First of all, hello. Today, me and my group, we're going to present the first chapter from the Proust and the Squid book. So let's jump right in. Child brains prepare to reading far earlier than one might ever suspect. Research shows that a child who listens to his parents or beloved one reading, this will be a predictor of his or her reading level years later. So there are two really different stories about childhood. In first story, almost everything we hope for occurs, and in the second story, a few tales are told and a little language is learned. So this shows that child fall behind the desired level even before start reading. So let's start with the first story. In this part, author tried to explain really interesting fact that as soon as infant can sit to a caregiver's lap, he can learn how to associate the act of reading with a sense of being loved. Also, we can read a lot of different books to our child, even if the part from Dostoevsky or maybe Doug Race's Result or something like this. Illustrated version will be better for child to understand. Also, according to the part from this book, picture of beloved items in the room the child can see also in real life and in the pictures. It might help to create relationships between drew one and the real one. The next step in this process, the child becomes able to recognize visual images about the book, and this makes child curious about illustrated books. After children growing up, they engage that everything around them has their own name. For example, if child see the picture of bear, they are able to understand that this is a bear. After 3 years old, child begin to understand emotional. From listening tales, they try all those emotions all from themselves. So here we can see relationships between reading and emotional development. Also in this age, children begin to understand other thinking and other people feeling, so they develop their empathy skills. So what language of books teach us? According to discovery, all books have their own language. First and most obviously, the special vocabulary in books doesn't appear in spoken language. So let's remember the part from the books that start with once upon a time or one long ago. I have never met a person that speak this way in real life. But however, this language of books gives children clue about the story type and what might be happen. Another feature of the language of books is understand meaning of literacy devices. For example, cheeks like rose petals. It makes child to compare cheeks to a rose petals. So this is extremely important for intellectual development. So now can we suppose that just reading a many of great books to a child is enough for preparation to preschool reading? No, this is not enough. According to researchers, reading book to a child only is a part of preparation to reading.
Another question is, what is a letter name? One aspect of print awareness begins with the discovery that printed words go in a particular direction. For example, English and European language from left to right, and Hebrew and Aramaic languages from left to right, right to left, and some Asian languages from top to bottom. Let's do an exercise to get a sense of what a child has to learn at the level of visual analysis. Look at these two Chinese logographs. These logographs consist of the same visual features that are used in alphabetic letters: curves, arcs, and diagonal lines. Okay, now look at that picture, and then I will turn the page with a blank picture. And then look at this picture. These two Chinese logographs, Chinese pictures, same, or are there any differences between them? Yes, these two pictures same. Maybe some of us find this practice humbling a little bit. Okay, now we understood that child has to recognize the letter before to learn how to read. Another question is, when should a young child begins to read? What do you think about a kid's learn age? It is always said no age for learn, no age for read, but this context is usually used for adults. Well, is there any age for to start to read for kids? As soon as children begin to name the letter of the alphabet, question arises whether they should learn to read early. But in reading readiness, as in life, there are always exceptions. Most of us know Scott in Harper's To Kill a Mockingbird. She learns to read before age 5, and this situation horrifies her new teacher. Now I want to read her some sentences about this. Reading was something that just came to me until I thought I would lose it. I never loved to read. One doesn't love breathing. Notes from the great unmelanated. Yesterday I tried to have to read and write to my 4-year-old sister, and she knows all the vowels and some consonants like T, P, S, and M. I don't know why especially them. And then I try to teach to write some words with her knowledge. And then I said, write the horse in Turkish art. And she wrote quite well. And then I said, read it. She read like R and T. And I said, combine it. She said, atı again. Now, we will finish the first story with a question. One of the most intriguing questions about children's first writing is whether or not they can read it. In fact, most children are hard-pressed to read back what they have written. But do they want to read? Thank you for listening to the first story.
So my part is the second story. The first one was all about giants and dragons, but now I'm going to talk about the not questions. What happens to a child if they haven't been introduced to these concepts, they haven't been playing with books of any kind, or they have not heard these stories in English? What of those who do not learn or respond to language the same as others? I like the second story a lot because all of us are different. We're born into a different house, we're born in different conditions, and these can affect a child's life a great deal. They do not just affect their lives, but ours as well. So in the first part of my story, it says that children who grow up in environments with no or few literacy experience are already falling behind when they start their education. A study proved that 5-year-olds who come from poor language environments have heard 32 million fewer words than middle-class average children. Like, imagine how a kid might feel when their teacher says something and they do not understand but their friends respond. We may think that words are just letters combined to make a meaning, but they're actually far more than that. When words are not heard, concepts are not learned. How can a child learn how to empathize if they do not feel how a main character feels when they're sad or mad or happy? How can they infer or predict if they do not know how a story goes? So the absence of book will actually have a crushing effect on a child's life. Even talking around the dinner table or a few free books provided by the government might seem like little steps, but they can actually help children a great deal in life. The same goes for children with ear infections. The book mentions that they are often avoided by their parents because ear infections don't cause major physical problems, but they are far more likely to face reading problems later on. So these do not have to be obstacles and they can be treated if not avoided. We in this department all have bilingual brains, which according to Merriam-Wolf is very good. Learning a new language at a young age is easier because our brains are more elastic. If you're exposed to a new language at a younger age, the brain processes both languages in an overlapping region, like a monolingual brain. But if you're exposed to it at a later age, the brain shows bilateral patterns of activation. 3 principles are mentioned about bilingualism in the book. The first one is if you know a word or a concept in your first language very well, it is easier for you to use it in English. The second one is the quality of language development is very important. And the third one is the earlier you become bilingual, the better it is for oral and written language development. I'd like to finish my speech by reading our chapter's ending. Reading never just happens. Not a word, a concept, or a social routine is wasted in the 2000 days that prepare the very young brain to use all the developing parts that go into reading acquisition. It is all there from the start or not, with consequences for the rest of children's reading development and for the rest of their